Okay. Good morning, everyone, on this beautiful Saturday that we have in the Pacific Northwest. I call this public meeting work session of the North Clackamas School District Board of Directors to order on Saturday, February 22nd at 9:03 a.m. And now I welcome Chief of Operations, Teresa Neff Webster.
Good morning. Again, thank you for taking your time on Saturday morning to join us. I'm going to ground us in our intent today. We're here to provide an update on the district's facilities, some systems that we've been working on, some analysis that we've done, and thinking through bonds and financing moving forward. And I'm joined at the table in the presentation with Matt, who is our Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, Cindy, who is a Project Administrator, and as well as Ron, who is a Project Administrator, who will be supporting our conference. The format of our time together will be to speak around 4 specific areas, and what we'll do is the staff will create a presentation, we'll give some data, then we'll pause for discussion and question and answering to ensure that we have enough time and space to talk through every subject, and then we'll end with our next steps as we see them moving forward. And the areas that we'll be discussing today will be our enrollment forecast, space analysis that we're undergoing, what we're looking and thinking about when it comes to our future bond themes, as well as our refinancing considerations. So with that, I will move forward with Cindy to talk through our enrollment and space analysis.
Good morning. I'm going to talk you through some of our most recent enrollment projections and impact on our facilities. And so, as you know, we contract with Flow Analytics, our demographers, who do a 10-year outlook. And it's always updated, but we do it annually, but it's always 10 years out. And as we get it each year, we take a look to see if there's any bubbles coming through, if there's any changes, what are the trends. And what we are finding out that in the next 9 to 10 years or so, our district is supposed to stay relatively flat across the entire district enrollment-wise. We had experienced a ton of growth on the east side over the last 10, 15 years, as you know, but we're staying, like I said, relatively flat. The good news is, as a large school district, we are bringing back our enrollment, and that's been helping us great. We do have some capacity challenges within some of the schools in the Nelson feeder pattern, and we'll talk to you a bit about that. So what you can see, I'll show you some graphs on the next couple of slides, but there's some assumptions that we need to understand as we go through these enrollment trends. We use the number of 25 students per class at elementary. We use the number of 28 students per class at middle and high school. And this is just simply for a math equation, and I'll walk you through that in a moment. It also assumes, because we're just doing a straight math formula, you have 20 classrooms in a school and you put 25 students in it, you get a number of students that school can handle. It doesn't necessarily take into consideration what are some of the other space uses and allocations within a school. And so specialized programs or some other pieces as well. And so that becomes particularly challenging at the middle and high school, where teachers oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes have their classroom empty while they're on their prep period. And so if you're going to look at the maximum capacity a school could possibly handle, not necessarily the ideal, but it's the maximum. So I just want to be really clear about that. And it also assumes that the programs we have today are the programs that we will have 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And as we know, things evolve. We're utilizing spaces now for some supports, particularly for students with special needs, that we didn't necessarily have in place 10 years ago. And so as programs evolve and things that we learn better, we change those. But this is where we are currently. And then knowing that in our high schools, because there's some numbers that are going to be a little bit stark when you look at Nelson for sure, at any given period, approximately 15% of those students are not on campus. They're taking their elective classes at one of the Save and Schellenberg programs. And so while it may think all the classes are full, again, those students are there. That doesn't take into account the fact that your cafeterias need to fit everybody in, your parking lot, your gym, so assemblies, all of that does take in a role. So what we are looking at today is Do we have enough seats in classrooms across our school district to manage our student enrollment and the projections that they're within? Because we're just looking at that, these numbers do not include our charter programs except Milwaukee Academy of the Arts, because it's located, co-housed in Milwaukee High School. The same with Sojourner, which is co-housed in Linwood. So we looked at a building as a whole. New Urban is a magnet program. It doesn't really affect any boundaries or any kind of enrollment feeder patterns. So those are not there. So you'll see numbers that get closer to 15,000. The slide before you saw we have around 17,000 students. That's why there's a difference.
Does it also assume full enrollment with no absenteeism?
Yes, yeah. So on any given day, there could be 8% absent, 12% absent, 15% absent, correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Mitzi and Tori, okay?
Yeah, we didn't even, because that screen's so little, we didn't even think. Go over there.
So let's first take a look at the Clackamas High School feeder pattern. What you see here are the schools that all feed into, the 4 elementary schools, Rock Creek Middle School and Clackamas High School. And the number above the third year of the bar graph there, so the darkest of the blue, that is where we're moving into the year 2930. And the number above that is what's the difference between now and then. So Mount Scott is expected to grow 16 students over the next 9 years. Not significant, not significant. The green bar is what is the capacity of that school. And so you'll see that everybody in this Clackamas feeder pattern, we have adequate capacity to handle all of the students. In fact, overall, we will have a decline of 282 students in that feeder pattern over the next 9 years. Here's the Milwaukee feeder. Again, the elementary schools that feed into Rao, again, feeding into Milwaukee High School. The MA numbers, Milwaukee Academy of the Arts, are included in that final graph. But the capacity, as you can see, still outpaces or is adequate to meet all of the student growth. We do see slight growth in this feeder pattern over all of these schools. It's about a little over 100 students are expected to grow in this feeder pattern. Here is the Rex Putnam feeder system. We have a net loss of 40 students over 9 years. You can see that green capacity bar is well above any of the capacity needs for the projected enrollment growth that's going to be happening or loss in some cases across this feeder system. I had one person that was looking at this that asked, well, if Alder Creek's gaining 3, why would Putnam lose 56? That doesn't make sense. They all feed into there. That's not what happens at high school. A lot of families make a lot of different choices. We offer a lot of different high school choices in North Clackamas. Some go to private school, they go to our own charters, they go to other charters, they move, etc. So high schools, it's not a direct line. It's much easier to add your elementary schools and see who's going into middle school. That's a much more accurate number. It doesn't work the same way with high school, typically. And here's the Nelson feeder. And as you can see, we have significant concerns with a 9-year change of over 500 students projected to move into that area. I don't think it's a surprise to any of us, as we've seen the growth that's happening out there. And in fact, we do have some decline in 3 of our schools. 3 of our elementary schools, Kennedy, Duncan, and Happy Valley Elementary, are looking at declining some enrollment. But Scouters is the big one where all the continued growth is. That's out where the Pleasant Valley Golf Course was. That's been building in multiple phases over the last several years. And then that obviously feeds into Happy Valley Middle School and then Nelson. So our green bar for the capacity of each school gets quite concerning once you get to middle school. And I remind you, just because the green bar is a little bit higher in the Happy Valley Middle School section than the actual blue bars next to it, it does mean every classroom is used every period. So and they all have to fit in the gym, and they all have to fit in the cafeteria. So there are significant concerns about future growth for the middle school and for the high school in this feeder pattern.
What was Rock Creek? I can't remember.
Rock Creek first one.
Okay.
It starts to decline.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to just look on that side, you've got 282 declining in the Clackamas feeder. Oop, wrong way, sorry. But you have over 500 increasing in the Nelson feeder.
What's interesting about Rock Creek is that it goes down in, not Rock Creek, was it Alder Creek? It goes down for
Yeah.
middle school?
Alder Creek goes up.
There was one that went down, this one,
Yeah.
but then they come back. It looks like, I mean, you get more for high school, even though it's not back to where it was.
Yeah.
It's not like Nelson.
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all. Yeah, it's a little different.
Cindy, do we know I mean, I know housing's sort of a big part of some of these trends, but do we know, like, particularly for Clackamas feeder, why there's such a dip in enrollment that's projected?
Well, overall, across across the state, probably across the nation, we have a decline in birth rates for sure since the pandemic. So there've been a lot less babies coming through our system, so it's going to take a long time before that would increase. It's starting to come back slightly. Who knows if it ever will? I mean, I think society mirrors what's happening in the world, and some people, make different choices. So I think that's happening. It's also an older community. And so all the infill has already happened. And so there's not a ton of places where you can have a lot of new housing developments. It's more singles and maybe a small apartment complex. So there's not a ton going in the Clackamas area.
So Cindy, are we seeing our enrollment in kindergarten decreasing?
It depends on where, but overall, yes, we have. I think it started to come back slightly, but the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen those numbers dipping. So I think that's it for the numbers, and then I'll have another pause here if you have additional questions. But I just want you to know a process. I went and visited every school in the last month or so, sat down with the principal, we walked it in many cases, looking at the map and identifying exactly how they use each space. Because we can look at a floor plan and we can look at enrollment and we can make a lot of assumptions about how a school utilizes space. And so then we looked at, well, what are the common factors among all of our schools, and we identified some of those spaces not to be counted. Particularly, here's an example at an elementary school. All of our schools have a space designated for a regulation room. So students might need a timeout from a classroom to gather their thoughts and work with a counselor or a social worker or an instructional assistant who might be in there and have some activities so they can quickly get back to class. That space is highly needed in our elementary schools, so we've designated that would be one that we wouldn't count as a classroom. Music doesn't count, PE doesn't count because students only go there for a portion of their week, and there's not the same group of students every single day. So really wanted to make sure we captured that, and in many cases changed the spreadsheet that we use to determine our capacity. And so just want to know that we have updated that, hadn't been done for quite a while, and so I feel confident about our data now.
So Milwaukee Elementary looks like it's getting really close to capacity.
Yeah, it is, and that is after the remodel, and so we did go back and look at each classroom to make sure that it was being utilized in the correct way. And so that, the good news there is, families are moving to Milwaukee. That's been a change over the last several years. People are coming to look for still what they can find as affordable housing in the North Clackamas School District for sure. Unfortunately, we've also seen some having to leave because they've been forced out because of economic reasons as well. But overall, the Milwaukee feeder system itself is relatively flat and growing in a few areas. But it's still, there's still some space there, while there's room in particular classrooms for sure.
Sorry, Cindy, Paul has his hand up, so Donna flagged it for me.
Great.
Paul?
Yeah, and maybe this isn't the right, I'm not sure if this is the right question, but based on these patterns, is to accommodate the growth in the Adrian C. Nelson area, is shifting boundaries of the various schools and an option? I mean, I don't know what a typical scenario is or method is to deal with these things, because I'm sure districts, have to face these questions all the time, and I'm sure Clackamas has in the past. Versus like putting portables on different campuses and so on.
That is a great question, and it's actually pertinent to this conversation because it is something that we are thinking about. We have had requests from schools to think about modulars, and as Cindy's doing this analysis, we are seeing the data and we're continuing looking at the capacity analysis in particular. That's just been completed, so we haven't really dug deeply into that as a leadership team, but it is absolutely thinking about boundaries, thinking about where we do have capacity and what that can look like. Because across our entire district, we right now don't have a large need, but in certain areas, we can see that ebb and flow. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Just I think all of those options are on the table, and as a board, I think it's important for you to know what those options are and make some considerations. Portable classrooms has certainly been an answer. We've done that at Kennedy and at Scouters to look at potential growth in the future. However, those are not permanent solutions. They're meant to be temporary. Cities, jurisdictions typically give you permitting knowing that it's a temporary solution. A few years, sometimes that turns into many, many more. But I think we need to look at all the angles.
How long does it take to, I mean, in the planning process, if you're looking at changing boundaries for schools, how long do you have to start preparing ahead of time before you actually do that, make that choice?
When in the last bond, we went through that process. It was a fairly relative quick process. However, there was a very widespread understanding of the why. We were going to be opening new schools. And so people recognized that we would have to change boundaries. We didn't have to spend a lot of time trying to bring people up to speed on the why. I would say that was about a 6 to 10 month process. With the community was about 6 months. Before that, there was some other groundwork being done. I would say if something like this is a surprise to community. They're not expecting this. This would take a lot more work to get people on board and understanding. And there's no new school to get to go to. So people look at those positive things, right?
Yeah, we would be looking at an 18 to 24-month process. So
Oh,
we would do
okay.
analysis, we would need to do community conversation, we would need to really dive into what our options are. So it would not be as simple as building a new building and then remodeling. So it would be a much longer process.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on enrollment or capacity?
All right, thank you very much. So I'm going to move us forward talking through our future bond themes. And I want to kind of start us in thinking about where we have been and what we've been doing. And so kind of looking back to what we've done and how we're thinking about moving forward. So in our previous bond cycles, we successfully prioritized large-scale renovations and new school construction. And these efforts address student and community needs, improving our learning environments across the district. As you all know, every North Clackamas building had benefited from our past bond investments. And thinking about our future focus, we are really shifting our approach from major construction projects to proactive maintenance and long-term care of our existing facilities. This strategy is emphasizing our infrastructure stewardship, ensuring our continued functionality and safety, and adapting to our evolving needs of our students and our staff, and really prioritizing the upkeep and maintenance of our current facilities, investing in our critical infrastructure. We're seeking to preserve our previous investments and be fiscally responsible when we're looking to the future. And when we're thinking about our new categories, I want to kind of ground this in some definitions of what we've done assessment-wise and how we're looking at our priorities. So a few assessments have already occurred and one is ongoing. So we did complete the district long-term facility plan, which provides a roadmap for future development, maintenance, and operations across the district facilities. and it ensures a systematic approach managing our current and future needs. This plan was finished in April of 2023, so it's relatively new still. And in that work was the facilities condition assessment, which is a comprehensive evaluation to evaluate our current assets and identify our maintenance needs that will inform investment decisions in tracking our infrastructure health. Additionally, this year we instituted the Incident IQ work order system, which is a new work order system that will manage and it manages and tracks our maintenance requests, and it actually integrates the FCA data. So what that means is it takes all of the information from the assessments and it puts it into the Incident IQ system so that the facilities team has all of the up-to-date information, and as they do work order and repairs, that information is fed back to the data, so we have living data. It's not stale data from 2 years ago. And then finally, we are in the process of conducting an internal safety audit regarding any safety needs that need to be addressed in our buildings, and also looking at industry standards when it comes to emergency management and response systems in our district. And through these assessments, we were able to create a strong list of priorities of projects and categories that need to be addressed moving forward. And we identified the priorities in 4 phases. So we have our critical phase, which means it is an asset that is in need of immediate action and it is to require imminent failure. I would say the recent approval of the roof work that's going to be happening at Putnam this summer is an identified critical need example. Then we have our priority 1 projects that have to be completed to meet building code or infrastructure needs, but they're not failing yet. And then we have priority 2, which are necessary but not urgent projects, and priority 3, which are the lowest level of project that can be addressed once the previous 3 are done. And our guiding principle in creating these prioritizations is really to create a structured approach around our resources and addressing our most pressing issues first, and safeguarding student safety and facility functionality as our priority. So as we looked at these assessments, we created these prioritized lists. We were then able to create 5 identified categories that right now we're looking at when we think about future bonds. And I'll walk through each category now, and they really, as I mentioned earlier, are focusing on infrastructure stewardship for the most part. So we will be addressing only the critical and priority 1 categories in this kind of theme, ensuring essential safety and infrastructure needs are met. And we have, the levels are safety and security improvements. So these would enhance our safety and security across the district buildings, which is a top priority, and it will include upgrading our communication systems and mapping our buildings for emergency response, and reviewing and adapting our camera systems to be more in line with the 21st century needs, pardon me. We then will look at our roof systems. Our district roofs are currently in need of attention across the board, and it will protect our facilities. And when you work on your roofs, you're actually protecting all of your infrastructure in the building, including the envelopes, keeping things from water damage and further structural integrity issues. Then we're looking at our ventilation and thermal comfort. And this is a broad strokes thinking about both HVAC and non-HVAC buildings, which means improving our heating, our ventilation, and our chilling capacity in systems across the district, creating healthier, more comfortable learning environments, and preventing our current HVAC systems from failure. We anticipate the ventilation project would impact 78% of our district schools. Then we're looking at our technology infrastructure enhancements. All of these categories entail really upgrading our current technology infrastructure. Every system that we'll be bringing on board is going to need a stronger infrastructure than we currently have from a technology perspective. We want to make sure we have the necessary tools and systems to support for modern learning and operational needs. Examples of this would be our vape sensor pilot, cameras, our security systems, our camera systems, our cooling systems all require strong technology infrastructure. And then the last category we have is our critical maintenance category. And this really encompasses all of the other critical and priority one projects that are not in the previous four categories. And that would be things like our boilers, windows, our envelope work that are in critical or priority one failure. And the last thing I wanted to share on this is we did do a very broad strokes estimate into what all of these projects would cost. So if we were to go to bond in 2026, these categories and these projects would estimated cost around $356 million. If we waited to go to bond in 2028, we would have approximately a $52.3 million increase to make it closer to $408 million. These critical and priority one projects would need. So hopefully in that space, I've been able to give you a snapshot of what we've assessed, how we've gotten to where we are, and our thoughts around associated costs. But I'm here with Cindy and Ron to answer any questions.
I have a question. If you can go back to the last slide with the, oop.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you. This is good. So for the technology infrastructure, I know that IT projects can be really costly. And so, but I also recognize this is a priority for us. It's what the team has identified. Can you explain, is it going to be sort of like replacing IT infrastructure and then just having new infrastructure, or is it like a little bit of both solutions? And then does it just depend by project?
That's a great question. It's a both. There is a need for us to look at some of our cybersecurity and storage needs. That is separate from project needs. But those would be a part and parcel of this category. And then the other upgrades are project-based. And what we're looking at and what the technology team is really working on is thinking about, if we are approved for certain projects, is there a way to look across the spectrum of what they're all going to need? So instead of piecemealing it, thinking of it as a more strategic project plan and putting in infrastructure that will, yes, address our current needs, address needs for new projects, but actually be in place so we don't have to continue to replace it at a piecemeal space.
That makes sense, because yeah, I mean, with IT changing all the time, like it just could get costly over
Yes.
time if we're not thinking about longer term. So
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. Sure.
We don't typically fund critical maintenance through a bond, right? It's some part of our general fund monthly is accrued for critical maintenance, or
I can defer to Cindy and Ron on how we've dealt with critical maintenance in the past.
Things break and we have to fix them.
Right.
And we have a budget for it, but we typically go over that budget on an annual basis, depending on, which is our biggest concern, that a lot of these systems are very old. So, and a water heater that you replace in your house is a fraction of the cost of what a water heater in a large school building costs. So, yeah, I think that last year was the worst I had seen in my short tenure. And it was from August throughout the entire year, once a month, there was some major thing that failed. And so it was 200,000 for this, and 85,000 for this, and 600,000 for that, and so that quickly adds up. But so yes, there is a budget. It's not an adequate budget.
Is that ventilation, thermal, does that include, we'll call air conditioning for the whole school?
So when I say chiller, that's what I mean by thinking about educational spaces and making them comfortable for our students and staff. And so I'm sure folks are familiar with split units, so they're just a unit in a room that creates a heating space and a chilling space and makes it comfortable. It is not HVAC. So HVAC is a system that's in the building that's created with all the infrastructure, and then there are chilling units. When people think of air conditioning units, those are typically house and non-commercial units, so something that you put in a window. Schools have used those in the past. They're not the most effective and efficient when it comes to energy use. And so when we're thinking about chillers, we're trying to think about what is something that is going to be long lasting, that is going to provide thermal comfort, because we do not have the capacity or ability to create HVAC in some of our buildings. But we can put in split units that will allow them to be chilled. They are not the same as a window unit that you would put in your house, because those, when you think about 25 to 30 people in a room, a window unit is actually not sufficient and actually will use more energy than we would like to think about using.
I wanted to follow up too on that cost, because I'm sure, cost of materials and the state of our politics now and tariffs, it's hard to know the difference between even 1 year and 2 years.
Yeah.
So what kind of costs, increase are you looking at? For dollars and
Yeah.
I just.
I'm gonna let Ron talk through how we created our kind of broad strokes.
Well, as you can imagine, the longer you wait to do roofs, the more roofs come due. So that's part of this, and the other part is escalation, whether it was 6% or 10%. Was estimated cost for increase in cost of roofs. So those two factors is what brings it up. More things come due, more carpet comes due, more painting comes due, more roofs come due, and things cost more.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really not shown here is when you don't do things in 2026,
Yeah.
there's an extra cost of what you discover when you do that roof with an extra 2 years.
Is that, you don't know what that is, so is there a percent that's in there? Like of unknown, is that packed into the 407? Like unknown costs that might increase
I would say it's not specifically called out, it's just part of the contingency.
the budget? Okay. You've been so good at that in the past, estimating that. Yeah.
And I do have a question while we're on this, the numbers. Are, for success of bonds, are we touching every school? Or, because these are very specific numbers, so are we touching every school or are we touching every feeder system? What is the,
It's a great question. We are touching every feeder system. We are touching equitably across the district on both sides of the district. And we are ensuring that we're touching not necessarily every building, but every critical and priority one asset. So every feeder system will be addressed. And we may be in every building, but we may not be doing the same size project in every building.
excellent. And then what did we, and this is probably more for Cindy and Ron, because the bond was executed incredibly well the last time, and the grants and the things that we were able to do, pay refinancing, we were able to do so much more than we ever anticipated. What did we learn from that last bond? Because it was so successful that we're carrying into this next bond.
I don't know if there's lessons, we actually create a list of like lessons learned, but it really gets into the weeds of permitting and agency and things like that. You're right, I think, with your oversight too, what you did on oversight committee, whether it was brilliance or luck, certainly it was helpful. We got the interest earnings, the premiums, the grants, it was extra money. We did a significant amount of extra work that was beyond the bond promises. Cindy, do you have more to add? Let's sort of repeat this one.
I think from the communication standpoint, which is where my role started, in that bond, being very transparent with our communities and our public about here are all the dollars, here's how every dollar's been spent, here's what you can expect next. And meeting those promises, I think, are really important as well, which means this planning, as you pointed out, does that escalation, is that included in there? I think we have done a great job in this district of including that. Unknowns with tariffs and other increased costs, that makes the dartboard a little bit different, I think. And so I think being very cautious and using conservative figures is really important as well.
We got new stuff too.
We
in
got
the
a lot
last
of new
bond.
stuff.
Yeah,
that
a lot of
people
new
like.
stuff.
That's more sexy than
Then
critical
roofs,
maintenance.
yes,
Right.
until the roof falls in,
Good
then,
point, yeah,
right, there's a
yeah.
concern. So
Yes.
yes, maintenance is not sexy,
No.
but people do understand safety and security and keeping a building healthy.
And
so-
technology, I think they
I
get
think,
technology.
yeah, and I think, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
So-
Maybe not the thing so
In
much.
those numbers, again, you said you have critical. Do you hit priority 1, 2, and 3
Yes,
at all?
critical and priority one.
Oh. You said that.
I have a quick question, and then I know Paul has his hand up as well. So this is the first time that we've ever, if, like, we're thinking about a maintenance stewardship bond. So this is would be the first time in our district to do that? Like, we don't have, I mean, we've done like maintenance, as you were saying, Cindy, but this is the first time that we're kind of like packaging, and we're kind of, hopefully, kind of messaging to the community of like, please support us.
I think you'll hear a lot more about the finance information in a little bit, but I think the difference is we were in a huge enrollment growth for so many years. We had to respond in building new schools and creating more space at not every school, but a lot of corners in the district. Now we're like, we don't necessarily need the extra seats right now, but what do we need? We need infrastructure and maintenance.
And the thing that I'll add is, being new to the district, but having a lot of experience in that, this is a very, in the best way, privileged place for us to be as a district, that we have had so much strong investment in the past, that we are now moving forward, maintaining that investment instead of falling into disrepair and then having to do a significant amount of repair and not taking care of things. I think the way that we're thinking about this is we've done so much great work in the past decade, and now it's our turn to really ensure that that great work maintains and stays for future generations as well.
thank you. Paul?
Yeah, one question, and I don't know if this can be answered, but I know in these kind of facilities, there's standard life cycle expectancy for the investments that have been made over the past several bonds. And I don't know if you guys look at that on the systems that have been installed, and have they lived up to their life cycle expectancy? And if not, are there investments that have to be made in these maintenance that to make up for systems that didn't last as long as they would? And if those questions come up by voters, is there a good answer for that?
That's a great question. So that is part of the facility condition assessment. So the work that was done in 2021, 22, and that was published in 23, actually takes all of the systems that have been created in the bond and the ones that were not touched at all, and puts them all in one space so that we can track, to your point, the life cycle, and is it living as long as the warranty has provided or that the manufacturer said that it would. I think we're very much in the analysis phase of that work, and I would kind of look at Ron to say, like, would you agree that we're still, we have the systems now, and now we have the ability to track, where previously without the FCA, we didn't have that information at our hands at a district level, and now we can kind of maintain and keep looking to see if there are space. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thanks very much.
Sure. Okay, I'm gonna, Jeff,
Make sure that people know that in '06 and 2016 bonds included significant unfunded maintenance and renovations and buildings. And so now, 10 years later, it's been 10 years, now another 10 years, we're at a point of not needing the significant renovations or buildings, just as Tracy said.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
But I didn't want to leave the point of people think we didn't do
For 10 years, some brings.
Can't believe it's been 10 years,
10 years,
because we just got done spending
and
it.
26.
I mean, and you think of your own house, I was just telling Tori, something breaks, at least something big every 10 years. It's a roof, it's a siding.
It comes due.
Yeah, it comes due, or you pay more. Like,
It's not fun to get a new roof.
no.
You
have
want,
to do it.
but you want everybody to come over and look at it because you've just spent, tens of thousands of dollars, but you're right, it's not, it's not exciting, right, yeah.
They'd rather look at your new patio, but your roof is gonna cost a lot more than your
Right,
patio.
but the roof is like, but I also think that it's a really important piece that we have put significant work into our buildings. And Milwaukee with a brand new building, new urban, of course, expanding and for Nelson, I think that's a very important piece that you've built it with your dollars, now we've got to take care of it with our, right? Like, we have to take care of it with those dollars, yeah. Because, I mean, we have some absolutely beautiful facilities, but to keep them that way, we need a roof that doesn't leak and, you know, and we need technology and infrastructure and ways to keep our kids safe and our staff safe at the same time. I do think our community will understand that.
One other comment I had was, you know, with looking at the forecasted enrollments, I mean, that justifies the maintenance of these buildings because we don't see a drop in enrollment for a while. We see it's pretty stable. So we've got to, it's not like we're going to be able to reduce the number of buildings that are needed throughout the district. You know, I'm sure that that can be a selling point for a bond like this as well.
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna move us into our financing and timeline considerations, so I'll turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Teresa. As you can see from the presentation to this point, there's been a lot of thought and consideration put into what we would like to look at in a future bond. One of the tools available to us financially to help prepare us for a future bond is refinancing some portion of future debt many years out into a more a closer time frame over the next couple of years. Before I go much further, I should kind of ground this in a reminder that all the dollars we're talking about here are generated through the bond tax rate that we have. There's no direct or anticipated general fund impact, but remembering that we are talking about our bond tax rate, that just is a reminder of the responsibility that we have to our taxpayers, and that also any future bond that we have, we put out there is ultimately dependent upon what they're willing to support. In terms of timing, we find ourselves at a point right now where, because of our bond tax rate and what it's scheduled to do, we do have an opportunity, at least in terms of what the rate looks like, to do a refinancing now. Our current tax rate is $2.37 per $1,000 of assessed value. As of July 1st, that's scheduled to go down to about $2. That $2.37 rate has been the rate, give or take, since the last bond. And so now, as we find ourselves going down to $2, that presents an opportunity for us now to consider a refinancing. A refinancing has several different benefits to it. One is that it does generate additional fundraising capacity when we do go out to bond next. It also offers the potential for savings through retiring debt early, and it reduces our overall debt burden out into the future. And as well, it does offer some rate consistency from where we are now, where we have been, and where we would be at a point where we're offering a future bond. There is obviously a lot of sensitivity around rates. So when we do go out for bond next, being able to do so at a point where the rate that we have on the bond would be a continuation of the existing rate is obviously beneficial. Now, in terms of what would be required to do a refinancing, there are a couple things here. The first is that it would require board authorization. We have a resolution that is included in the packet on the next board meeting on the 27th. It's important to know that this would authorize us, but it would not obligate us to do the refinancing. That would be critical in doing a refinancing is the market conditions at the time that we would go out for the refinancing. Because we're talking about taking an amount of money out into the future, 15, 20 years out into the future, and paying that off over the next couple of years, what we have to do is the time value of that money. $1 that we would spend on debt service today is worth more than $1 that we would spend on debt service in 10 or 20 years. So the rates at the time that we do that refinancing would have to be favorable enough so that that exchange works out in our favor. This is where I have to be kind of a wet blanket on that. The market rates at the time right now are, it's pretty ambiguous. I would say at the moment, if we were doing this today, it would probably be enough. But we need the authorization in order to do it. It's close enough though that there is a real possibility that the market conditions could improve enough so that at the point we're looking to do the refinancing, the things may have turned to the point where we can do it. Right now, I would say it's probably about 50-50.
What are you, on the refinance, are you looking at for maturity to keep the same maturity as existing, shorten it or lengthen it?
It's pretty similar to what we've already structured. It would really, one of the key considerations would be the timing of when we're looking to be able to generate the additional capacity by moving things forward.
So I just want to be sure I'm understanding. So would this be a tax increase or not? It would depend on what we can get at the time?
It would be, what we would do is we would bridge the current rate to 37 out 2 years, 4 years, to the point at which we're looking to do a future bond offering. So that at that point, when we go out for bond, the rate that we are seeking there would be the same, would be about 237. So that what we would be asking voters is to extend a current rate.
That would be easier.
That would be what we want. That's the position we want to be in. As I mentioned, being able to do a refinancing does generate additional capacity. This is analysis done assuming a $2.37 per $1,000 of assessed value. As you can see, in a 2026 bond offering would generate about $219 million. With a refinancing in 2028, about $302 million with a refinancing. Without a refinancing, it's about $198 million in 2026 and $261 in 2028. Roughly every year with a refinancing, that generates about an additional, give or take, $10 million every year. That's what the refinancing would do. A really important thing to remember and keep in mind is that without the refinancing, if we do not do a refinancing, our rate drops down to $2 per $1,000 of assessed value. So that in a bond situation in 2026 or 2028, without a refinancing, the rate that we would be seeking is, in this example, $2.37. So at that point, what we would actually be doing is asking voters for a rate increase.
This is modeled on today's rates or?
Yeah, it's about a month old, month and a half.
So in a up 300 or down 300, what do those numbers look like?
It hasn't changed materially.
If we went up 300 basis points from today, yeah, what's that look like if rates go up 300 and what's it look like if rates go down 300?
We'd have to recalculate those numbers, but yeah, we can do that.
So you also said in 2026, we need 355 million. So we're only getting 219, right?
Yes.
Are you gonna address that?
Yeah, So these are numbers that we've seen previously put together. The orange amount is everything that we talked about before in terms of critical and priority money needs. blue is what we would be able to generate with a refinancing, and the light blue is what we'd be able to generate without a refinancing.
Oh, there's
As you
another.
can see, under any of the scenarios that we're talking about, we are not anticipating that we'd be able to generate enough through the bond to address all of those needs.
Can I just read the numbers since
Yeah.
Yeah,
already
I cannot read.
So the 2026, that orange number is the $356 million. The blue right below it is the 219 million, and below that is 198 million. And in the 2028, the orange is 408 million. The dark blue is 302.6, and then the lower blue on the 2028 is 261. Rounded figures. So if you were having trouble reading that, it's a little easier. The real resonation on here is good. It doesn't project very well. Apologize for that.
So I have no history on bond premiums, but on average, do typically, when you go out for bond, you always get a pretty good premium, or just based on market, accidental timing?
It really, a lot of it does depend on the conditions of the market at the time that you're going out. Getting back to the earlier point about where we are and what the conditions might be over the next couple months, the case for pessimism is that the rates have been, particularly the short-term rates that we're looking at, have been pretty consistently above the range that we're looking at that we would need over the last couple of months. The case for optimism is that the longer-term rates, like the 10-year rates, have been declining over the last couple of weeks and months. So if we see the trend in the long-term rates continue to the short-term rates, we may have an opportunity to do a refinancing. If the short-term rates continue where they have been, then we may not be able to. But we would need to have the authorization in place to be able to pursue a refinancing if the rates do turn. Going back a slide, a couple things that I just want to touch on really quickly. If we don't do the refinancing now, we would lose the opportunity to go out for a bond asking for a zero tax increase. If we do a refinancing, this would be included in the budget development process and would be change in our debt service would be reflected in our budget for the 25-26 year. And as we just saw, any of the scenarios don't generate it. We would anticipate enough to generate the needs we identified.
So if you could refinance it, got lucky and it was 195, do we know what like that 5 basis point equals in? I mean, is it significant dollars? It's got to be a lot.
Yeah, we were kind of so getting to the specific rates, the prime driver there is the 2-year notes. Those have been about 4.25% consistently, give or take, over the last month and a half. I have that bookmarked, and first thing in the morning when I come in, I hit refresh and take a look at the rates, and I'm pretty consistently disappointed.
Did they hear the groan from the building?
If you do go back though, to the fall, when we were doing a lot of this advanced work, the rates were low enough, they were kind of about 3.75. So at that point, it really was, it wasn't just where we were anticipating that we may be able to break even on the time value, it was an actual savings. So again, we would need favorable conditions for the time value to be break even. And that's something that we're looking at all the time. In terms of the timeline, as I mentioned on the 27th, we would be needing to authorize the refinancing. Between now and mid-April, we will be continuing to monitor the market conditions. I'll be continuing to refresh that page every morning. We'll be talking to our analysts about what the market's looking like. So we are gonna be looking at things pretty thoroughly between now and then. Our deadline to determine roughly whether we would be able to go or not go, that's roughly mid-April. At that point, if the go, no-go decision at that point is a go, market conditions are favorable, we would have about another 2 weeks or so in order to finalize the details, the scope of what we're refinancing, the duration, whether we're kind of restructuring for 2 years or 4 years, and also what the rates are at the time. And as I also mentioned, in terms of the implementation and everything else, this would be the time to begin at the start of the new fiscal year, so July 1st, we would be included in our budget for the upcoming year.
Sorry, Matt, so that mid-April, the determination whether or not to proceed with refinancing, that would be a board.
We would be, on the 27th, we would have the authorization to proceed with the refinancing. So that would be the board action, at that point, would be to authorize us to proceed with one. And after that, we would continue to monitor conditions and decide whether to go forward or not. We would obviously be in communication with the board to keep you apprised of where things are, what direction things are going.
So, interesting. Okay.
And that's a short time span. I mean, to me, mid-April to May 1st. So I'm assuming you're going to have scenario A, B, like we're going to have a list of contingency plans that this is what we're going to, so it's not like we're going to only have 2 weeks to decide what to do. There will be contingency plans up until that point?
Oh, we would pretty much want to have things decided
Okay,
by April 15th.
okay, all right.
We'd usually want to have the other details, the scope, the duration, things like that decided ahead of time. It wouldn't be in that last 2 weeks where we're deciding those details.
Okay,
That gives us an opportunity to kind of fine tune some things. But we probably would want to have the major decisions outside of whether or not to go or not to go decided in advance.
okay. And then when it says the refinancing implementation is July, that way it
That's-
remains the 237 starting in July, correct?
Exactly.
That's our goal. Okay, got it. All right.
So, sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out, okay, so I understand the February date of we're just authorizing, for consideration, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so this, considering, the authorization just to refinance, but not a commitment. And so I guess my question was, so would that mid-April be like you all coming back to the board and saying we've looked at the market conditions, we've done a little bit more like assessing, and then would it be like another step, maybe, I don't know if that might be a question, but I'm just thinking that that's sort of a long time for the board not to,
The point for the
Revisit.
formal board action would be in the meeting on the 27th. At that point, we would have the authorization to proceed with the refinancing. After that, and before making a decision, we would be monitoring all of the conditions that would weigh into that decision. And we would obviously keep the board apprised of where things are. But there would be no formal board action that would be taken after the 27th for a refinancing. But again, we would obviously do any refinancing with the knowledge and consultation of the board.
yeah, I guess maybe it's just language for me, but like just the determine whether to proceed with refinancing, that would be your team. Like you all would be kind of getting into the weeds, determining that, and then hopefully, right, I'm obviously reporting back to the board of.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely. Any decisions of this magnitude are, even if we already have the formal authorization, we would definitely do that with the knowledge of keeping the board consulted where things are.
can't wait for a board meeting to take advantage of rates.
Right.
You gotta like
So
act.
the timing for
Yeah.
having the board take action now is that there's a lot of pieces that have to be done to prepare a potential bond offering. We'd be working with bond counsel, we'd be preparing a whole lot of work. So we need to get, if we wanted to do a offering, to have it in place by July 1st, we need to begin doing some of that work now. But again, we would have that opportunity to have an off-ramp in mid-April if conditions are not favorable.
That makes sense.
Why are the tax, why is it dropping to $2 per, is it because we have more houses and more construction since the last bond, or why is it dropping? Its rates are higher.
That is driven by when, that's mostly driven by when previous debt has expired.
Okay.
So if you were to look out at our rate, our bond rate, what we would anticipate over time, you would see, and you kind of looked at it in vertical slices, you'd see part of it is from this bond offering, part of it is from this bond
blended
offering,
rate.
and part of it is from this bond offering. In this case, there is a previous offering that we are,
Dropping.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the genius answer. The dumb answer was in 2016, we planned for this. We wanted to step down for a bond 10 years out and a loss of capacity. Knowing that 37 cents wasn't gonna cover whatever, but it could cover a lot.
Yeah.
It's like one has ended. Is that right? Okay. It seems you've done a tremendous amount of work. I'm really impressed. But I, like Kathy or Gina was saying, that's a short timeline. Do you feel comfortable with that? I mean, that by June or July and May, if the rates are there.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I'm impressed with all the work that you've done. Great team.
So, that is the timeline, the micro timeline specifically for the refinancing. This is the macro timeline for the overall bond process. We have timelines here for November 2026 and November 2028. Really the key thing here is that if we were looking at a November 2026 offering, you can see that the work there, getting the bond advisory committee, studying things and doing the research, polling, community outreach, engagement, and things like that, that would be scheduled to begin in September. So it really is a, if we're looking at 2026, this is action that would really be engaging in sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Heather.
Any?
Pause for questions, further questions, both about refinancing, but also what those bond numbers would look like.
So what's the biggest deficit? The 26 or the 28? It's 407 for 28. What was?
Sorry, I apologize. So you'll see it's actually about half in each. So we would be getting around, if we were with financing, I should say, we would be getting around half of the need, half of the financing to get the projects done that are needed. Similarly, in 2028, it's, again, projections are what they are. We're looking at, we would be receiving around half of the need.
Wasn't it 407 for 28?
Correct.
So 100,000, 100 million. And then what was the 26? 317?
356. Yeah, I wrote. Yeah. I know it's hard to read it.
So worse in 26.
Slightly worse, yeah. And I will say real projects, what that means really is we would not look at any priority one. We would only be addressing critical with these financings.
However, some of those priority one might turn into critical over those next 2 years. So every time you delay, it's
Right.
it's something you have to consider.
and have like percentages. You had like 5 areas, was it?
The categories?
Yeah, the categories. And so do you have like percentages? How much is
In
this?
each
How much
category.
is that?
Just keep going the wrong direction, sorry. I
That little
apologize.
wheel.
So,
That.
yeah, so what we've looked at across the categories is that, one, some of them overlap. Safety and security will sometimes overlap in critical maintenance and technology, as I mentioned. And while we don't do a straight quarter, 25% each, we are looking, as I mentioned earlier, at this being, addressing the entire district, both sides of the district, and all of the programs.
So one area that's heavy in cost, I guess
If we
is
were
what I.
looking to prioritize these categories, as your question, we would be looking at safety, security, and a combination of ventilation and roof would be so we.
Big cost factors. Okay. Okay.
Mostly because, those three things touch on critical maintenance and infrastructure, if that makes sense. We would take away some of those other, priorities, but we would also have to look at within those three categories only the critical failure spaces or a system, for example, in safety, we wouldn't maybe look at all three of the systems that we want to upgrade. We would have to prioritize one of those systems, if that makes sense. Sure. Any other questions regarding financing?
When do you want?
Which bond do I want?
26 or 28?
Well, I am a very pragmatic person and I don't wanna wait to fix things. So if I were thinking about what we need to get done, I would look at 2026. But my friend to my right will also have me look at our financial considerations of what we can actually get done in 2026. So we are very much two sides of the slice of bread, I think, right now.
We also have to think about the teacher levy, which is out 2028, right? So
Right.
Already?
Mhm.
5-year thing is crazy.
There's also a city levy, 27.
Happy Valley, there's a potential Happy Valley bond in 2027 that they mentioned at our joint meeting as well, that we need to consider in the mix. And so I will just kind of name a few next steps that we've already thought through, we want to make sure that you're aware of. As Matt has mentioned, there will be a refinancing authorization on the agenda for February 27th. We are going to be leading a community conversation on March 19th, and the topic will be our facilities. And it'll be very much both educational and also a seek to kind of get some feedback on how we're thinking about things with our community members. Ron, Cindy, and I will be leading the charge, having that conversation on the 19th. We're excited about. We are going to continue to monitor our enrollment and our space capacity. As I mentioned, we have the information through Cindy's work, and now she's creating reports so that we can kind of dive into it with all partners to kind of make sure we're thinking about these space use the correct way. And then we will be thinking about establishment of a advisory committee for this coming fall, thinking about what that looks like and feels like. I will name that we gave you a lot of information in a short amount of time. So we appreciate kind of the engagement and also the really thoughtful questions. Happy to answer more questions. We're here for that, but also know if you'd like to take this information and come back to us, we're happy to give the information or answers asynchronously as well. We currently have no more information to provide you today.
Share this slide.
Yeah, because it's not in the
presentation with
board
us.
book, I don't think.
Yeah, sure. We will
That'd be
absolutely-
great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure, of course.
and this will be shared at the community conversations as well.
Excellent, thank you.
This information on the 19th.
I know the no new same tax rate is always appealing on bonds. It would be, just for curiosity, if it wasn't a huge exercise, to know what 13 more cents gave us if it was 250.
Right, yeah.
the community might wanna know that too, like I can handle 13 more cents if we got 200 million more, it's not, but.
Absolutely.
I know, it's very powerful when you see those in the voters pamphlet, no, not a tax increase, just to ring a little bit.
We can absolutely do that. Another one of the reasons we use 237 in all of this presentation is that it really kind of does an apples to apples, so you can understand what the different variables, the impact that those have.
So I want to circle back to Paul's question, because if we do this, we have to address that crowding in the Nelson feeder. So at some point, we would have to probably look at that boundary change. How does that fit in the plans?
One of the things that we will name is that when we're looking at our analysis, we're looking at, one of the things that we haven't completed in the space analysis is we've done the walkthroughs, but we haven't actually looked at, are we using our space the most efficiently? And have we really looked at the way we're operating and the way that our students and teachers are in our spaces? So once we've done that analysis, we will be thinking about what are those alternatives to support in spaces where they're getting cramped. So for example, would that mean a short-term solution of modulars? Or does that mean we would bring a recommendation to think about a long-term process for boundaries and looking at what that looks like and feels like in all of our feeder programs? I think we look at this as our first step. So we now have strong numbers with our enrollment numbers. We have strong data that we're evaluating on our space usage. And what we need to really look at is, are we using the space efficiently and effectively? And then what does that look like in 9 years, using that space efficiently and effectively? It may be that even when we use it efficiently and effectively, we need to think about different ways of bounding, but I wouldn't say we're there right now. I do think it's a consideration that we're gonna have to have in the long run. Is there anything you would add?
I think, and like I said, every year we update those enrollment projections and we look at that very, very closely. I think we're probably 2 years away, at least at one of our schools, from being overly concerned. There's nothing immediate, but that could change when we get our projections in a year from now. So we continue to look at that. I think many more years than a couple is gonna feel really tight.
Have we looked at programs like making Clackamas a different type of high school, like an IB program or a bilingual high school, or something that would draw students from Adrian C. Nelson over like we've done at Milwaukee and Putnam? Making them
It's something that we
non-IB?
need to do that work. That's the work that we still need to do.
The STEM
It's part of
school.
this.
Something that makes it a little bit different and attractive
I mean,
Get
I was just, I'm
to out of
sorry.
boundary kids over.
I'm just thinking about the timing too with going out for a bond, and I think we'll get that question. Hey, we're crowded. We need a new middle school, we need a new elementary. So we just need to be prepared for that.
Sure.
And when that comes up, and when we start addressing it, if we do have to do boundaries sooner and have a bond, that could be kind of dicey.
And sorry, I just got here and I feel like I probably should not be talking yet, but the community concern about these issues about crowding and boundary changes is going to spike, I think, before necessarily the district says, okay, now we're up against it, we need to make these decisions, right? So you could be a couple years away maybe as the district from thinking about, okay, now we really need to, start thinking about this. But that in those 2 years, the community is already, ramping up.
Sure, so Director Dobson, just to be clear, we did address that we're talking about this, we're researching it now to have an answer before 2 years from now. So one of the things we're thinking about are all the global processes that we should be thinking about for sure, because we are already there, we're not waiting. I just want to be really clear that we are in the process of looking at that currently, so that we have a plan for this year. Appreciate that. Well, with that, we will say a hearty thank you again for taking time on a Saturday to discuss this, and I'll turn it back to Chair Lynn.
Thank you. It's weird not to have a mic, but it's not. I'm like projecting. Great, well, thank you so much, board, for this discussion, and staff and team and superintendent for just putting together this really detailed picture of what's to come in our future considerations. So it is now 10:17 a.m. and this public meeting work session of the North Clackamas School District Board of Directors is adjourned. Gavel us out. And now I call to order this public meeting of the North Clackamas School District Board of Directors to order on Saturday, February 22nd at 10:18 a.m. And board, in the packet, there is just one item for this morning's meeting. The item on the consent agenda is a travel request for the Sabin-Schellenberg Professional Technical Center building construction. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Chair Way, I move board approval of the consent agenda for this annual item of the travel request from the Sabin-Schellenberg Professional Technical Center.
Second.
Thank you. Is there a discussion? Okay, it's been properly moved by Vice Chair Benaloga and seconded by Director McVeigh. And I call now for a vote on the motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and we've got Director Kemp also. All those that oppose, no. Okay, and the motion passes with a vote of six. Thank you. 6-0. Okay, thank you, board. That was brief. And so now it is 10:19 a.m. And this public meeting of the North Clackamas School District Board of Directors is adjourned.